Welcome back to Maggie's stories. She was just a waitress. He was a mafia hair who had everything. But at 9:47 p.m., he fell apart in a section.
The restaurant was loud in the way that made Eve feel alive. Clinking glasses, overlapping conversations. The hiss of the kitchen passed through when Chef Miho slid another plate through and hollered something in Korean that loosely translated to, "Table 6 is waiting, and I am not your personal alarm clock." Eve caught the plate, winked at the pass-through window, and called back in perfectly accented Korean. "And yet here you are reminding me. So whose alarm clock?" "Chef." The kitchen erupted. Someone knocked a ladle against a pot. Miho groaned like a man who had lost a battle he'd started himself. This was Eve's world. Hanok Table, a mid-century fusion restaurant tucked into the quieter pocket of Itaewon, where the street noise softened and the lighting stayed golden and the clientele ranged from homesick expats to Seoul's quietly powerful elite. Had been her world for 3 years now, and she ran her section of it like a woman who had been born with a tray in her hand and a comeback already loaded. Eva Dees Campbell, 26. Jamaican by blood, British by education, Korean by choice, which, as she would tell anyone who asked, was the only kind of belonging that actually meant something. She had come to Seoul on what her university friends called a gap crisis. Not a year, a crisis. After her international hospitality degree from Leeds landed her a graduate position in a London hotel that paid her exactly enough to afford a room the size of a generous wardrobe. She had spent 4 months folding napkins into swans for people who didn't look at her. And then one evening she had opened her laptop, typed "jobs in Seoul" into the search bar on a dare to herself, and 3 months later she was here. That had been 3 years ago. She had never rebooked her return flight. She loved Korea the way she loved a well-made thing. Not blindly, not without criticism, but with a deep and genuine appreciation for its texture. She loved the rhythm of the language, which she had studied obsessively until her Korean was fluid and funny and occasionally startled people into silence. She loved the food, the seasons, the way Seoul felt like 10 cities layered on top of each other and you could slide between them like changing channels. She loved her little apartment in Mapo, which she had decorated with warm wood and too many plants and a single framed print above her bed that read, in her mother's handwriting, "You are not too much. You are exactly enough." She loved the work, even when the work included colleagues who smiled at her face and talked behind her back. "Eve, table 12 keeps asking for you specifically," said Jiyeon, drifting past with an empty tray and a look that was trying very hard to be casual. "Then table 12 has excellent taste," Eve said without breaking stride. Jiyeon had been the one to tell the new manager, back in January, that Eve had been rude to a customer, which was a lie so creative Eve had almost respected the imagination behind it. She'd been pulled aside, questioned, defended herself with receipts. Literally, she had pulled up the digital order history and the customer's subsequent 5-star review that mentioned her by name, and walked back to the floor without an apology from Jiyeon and without expecting one. That was the thing about Eve. She didn't need the apology. She needed people to understand, clearly and without ambiguity, that she saw them, that she could not be erased, that her warmth was a choice she made every morning and her sharpness was a fact of her architecture and both of them were hers. She checked on table 4, an elderly couple celebrating an anniversary, the man shy about ordering dessert, the woman giving Eve a look of pure conspiracy, and talked him into the black sesame cake. She refilled the water at table 9, where a group of university students were sharing one bottle of wine with the guilt of people who had checked the menu prices before sitting down. She slipped them the bread basket without charging it and pretended not to notice their relief. This was who she was when she was working. Attentive, generous, genuinely delighted by people in a way that wasn't performance. It was just her, this warmth she carried, this ability to locate the soft human center of whoever she was looking at and speak directly to it. It was this quality, this gift, really, this curse depending on the evening that made her notice him. He came in at 9:47 p.m., which was 13 minutes before last seating, and the hostess almost turned him away before catching herself. He was, and Eve's brain supplied this without her permission, which annoyed her, remarkable looking. Not in a way that announced itself. He wasn't the kind of handsome that walked in and expected rooms to rearrange. He was the kind of handsome that you registered slowly, detail by detail, like your eyes were doing careful work. Tall, dark blazer over a black shirt with the top button undone. A jaw that a sculptor would have considered excessive. Hair that fell slightly, deliberately, over his forehead in a way that made him look younger than his bearing suggested. He looked, Eve thought, like a man holding himself together with both hands. She was assigned his table before she'd finished the thought. Fate or the rotation system. Probably the rotation system. She crossed the floor with her notepad and her standard opening, warm, efficient, leave them room to settle, and got close enough to read his face and stopped reading it almost immediately because it was doing something she wasn't prepared for. He was staring at the menu, completely still, and his jaw was working the way jaws work when someone is pressing very hard against something that is pressing back. "Good evening," she said, in Korean, keeping her voice the same temperature she always used. Steady, unhurried. Like there was no place else she needed to be. "Welcome to Hannock Table. Can I start you with something to drink?" He looked up. His eyes were. She cataloged this clinically, professionally, with the detachment of a woman who had served hundreds of beautiful people and was not moved by beauty alone. Very dark and very tired, and carrying something in them that she recognized the way you recognize a song from the first note. She had seen that look in the mirror. Not recently, but she remembered it. "Water," he said. "Please. Still or sparkling?" "Still." She wrote it down, though she didn't need to. "Take your time with the menu. I'll be back." She brought his water. He ordered the braised short rib, barely glancing up. She put the order through, circled back to her other tables, kept him in her peripheral vision the way she kept all her solo diners. Not intrusively, just aware, the way you're aware of a candle in a room. His food came. He ate slowly. He refilled his water glass twice from the carafe and stared at the middle distance between bites with the focused intensity of a man doing arithmetic on something that wasn't numbers. He was almost finished when it happened. She was coming back to offer dessert, a formality she always offered even when she suspected people would decline, and she was 3 steps from his table when she saw his shoulders drop. It was subtle, the kind of thing most people would miss, the careful architecture of a person's composure, doing a thing that architecture does when it's been bearing weight for too long. He pressed one hand flat on the table. The other came up to his face, slowly, and covered his eyes. And then, quietly, with the total lack of theater that made it somehow more devastating than any loud grief she had ever witnessed, he began to cry. Not sobbing, not performance, just tears, escaping through a hand that was trying to stop them, his whole chest moving with the effort of breathing through something he clearly had not given himself permission to feel. Eve stopped walking. She looked around the section. The nearby tables were absorbed in their own evenings. Gion was across the restaurant. The hostess was at the front. Nobody had seen. She made a decision. It was not in the employee handbook. She was fairly certain it was in violation of at least 2 sections of professional distance protocol. She made it anyway because she was Eve Campbell and she had never in her life been able to walk past someone hurting without stopping, and tonight was not the night to start. She slid into the empty chair across from him. He startled. His hand dropped from his face. He looked at her with the expression of a man caught in something he thought was private. Alarm, shame, the reflexive gathering of composure, and she watched him try to reassemble himself and she said, very quietly, very gently, before he could finish the reassembly, Hey, you're okay." He blinked, opened his mouth. "Don't," she said, still soft. "Don't tell me you're fine. You don't have to." Something crossed his face that she would think about later, much later, when she was home and the night was quiet. It was the expression of someone who had been braced for a particular kind of contact and received a completely different one, like expecting a wall and finding a window. "I'm sorry," he said, in Korean, his voice rough at the edges. I apologize, I don't. You came in 13 minutes before close and ordered water and the short rib and you ate alone and you're crying," Eve said, ticking these off with gentle matter-of-factness. "That's not a reason to apologize. That's just a hard Tuesday." His breath hitched. Something that might have been a laugh or might have been the opposite, somewhere in the space between. She leaned forward slightly. And then she did something that surprised even her. She tilted her head and said, in the softer, rounder cadence she used for exactly no one in professional settings, "Talk to me, baby. What happened?" Not flirtatious, not rehearsed, just warm, the way her mother used to say it. The way it meant, "I see you, I'm not going anywhere, the world can wait." He looked at her like she had just said something in a language he had forgotten he knew. And then, to his obvious horror and her complete composure, he started crying again. properly this time. His hand came up to his mouth and he turned his face slightly away and his shoulders shook and she reached across the table, without thinking, and put her hand over his on the tablecloth. "I've got you," she said. "I've got you." His name was Kong Siwon. She wouldn't learn that for another hour. She would learn it sitting across from him after the restaurant had emptied and Miho had let her lock up and she had brought him barley tea and sat with him while he talked. Haltingly at first, then with the loosening relief of someone who had been holding their breath for a very, very long time. He was 28. His father ran one of the most powerful private investment houses in Seoul, which was a polite way of saying his family moved money and influence through the city in ways that weren't entirely sunlit. He was the eldest son. He had been groomed, shaped, positioned. He attended meetings and made decisions and was looked at by everyone around him with expectation so thick it had become its own kind of weather, something you couldn't see but couldn't breathe through. He had not cried in front of another person in 4 years. 4 years, Eve repeated. He looked at the table. There wasn't space for it. Where did it go? I don't know. A pause. Somewhere internal. Somewhere bad. She nodded slowly. She thought about her mother, about the hospital room, about the 6 months after when she had gotten very good at being fine and very bad at sleeping. She didn't say any of that yet. That was for later, maybe. For now, she just said, "You know what my grandmother used to say?" She said, "Baby, you can't carry water." In a closed fist. He looked up at her. "You've been clenching," she said simply, "for 4 years. And tonight your hand finally got tired." He was quiet for a long moment. And then, slowly, with the reluctance of someone who wasn't sure it was allowed, he smiled. Small. Real. The kind of smile that lives at the bottom of a person and only comes out when something has reached it. "Who are you?" he asked. "Eve," she said. "And I think you should order the dessert, because that black sesame cake is genuinely the best thing that's happened to this restaurant and you're going to want to meet it." He laughed. An actual laugh startled out of him. And in the empty restaurant, with the lights low and the barley tea warm between them, something began, quietly, without announcement. The way the best things always do. The date he asked for wasn't really a date. That was what Eve told herself anyway. On the Saturday morning he texted her. He had put his number in her phone before leaving the restaurant that night, which she had allowed with the clinical detachment of someone accepting a business card, and asked if she wanted to walk through Bukshan with him. Just to talk. "If you're free. No pressure." She read the message twice. Then she typed back, "I'm free, but I walk fast." His response came in 11 seconds. "I'll keep up." She wore wide-leg linen trousers the color of warm sand, a fitted white rib top, and her good gold earrings, the long ones her mother had sent her the Christmas before last, wrapped in a note that said, "For the occasions that deserve it." She told herself this wasn't an occasion. She told herself she always dressed like this on Saturdays. She told herself several things that her mirror politely declined to confirm. Siwon was waiting at the entrance to the village when she arrived, in a light gray linen shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and he looked so entirely different from the man who had crumbled at table 9 that Eve stopped walking for just a moment, just half a breath, before her face rearranged itself into something easy and warm. "You look rested," she said, by way of greeting. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't categorize yet. "You look—" He stopped himself, cleared his throat. "You came. I said I would. People say things." She tilted her head. "I don't." They walked. That was all it was, at first. Just 2 people moving through the narrow stone-paved lanes of Bukshan, where the Hanok rooftops curved against the sky like something from a painting and the morning tourists hadn't yet thickened into crowds. Siwon walked with his hands in his pockets and talked, carefully at first testing the water, and Eve walked beside him and listened with the particular quality of attention she gave things that mattered, which was the same quality she gave everything, because she was constitutionally incapable of half measures. He talked about his father. The way the expectation in that household had a sound, not words, just a frequency, a hum that meant you know what is required of you. The way he had learned to speak business at the dinner table before he had learned to speak feelings anywhere. The way his younger brother Sihoon had escaped into architecture and their father had been disappointed for exactly 6 months before deciding an architect in the family was a useful thing. And watching that recalibration had taught Siwon something bleak about the nature of love in his house. "He loves you," Eve said. "Not a defense. Just a fact stated plainly." "I know," Siwon said. "That's what makes it complicated." She nodded. Love doesn't automatically come with the right tools. Some people love you very much with completely the wrong toolkit. He glanced at her sideways. Is that from your grandmother again? No, that one's mine. They bought coffee from a tiny window stall where the woman recognized Siwen. There was the briefest flicker of something in her eyes, that particular soul recognition of someone whose family name carried weight. And Siwen paid before Eve could reach for her wallet, and she gave him a look and he said, preemptively, I asked you to walk with me. I'm buying the coffee. And if I'd asked you, then you'd be buying. Good answer, she said, and took the cup. The morning stretched. They walked further than either of them had planned, winding out of Bukshan and into Jiangbakung's outer paths without quite deciding to. Talking about smaller things now, the coffee, a cat that had appeared on a garden wall and stared at Siwen with profound judgment. The fact that Eve had recently argued with her upstairs neighbor about the structural ethics of drilling into shared walls at 11 p.m. and 1, because she had looked up the building's lease agreement and cited it from memory. You memorized your lease? I memorized the relevant sections. He stared at her. Why? Because information is armor, Siwen. I carry mine everywhere. He laughed. The same startled, real laugh from the restaurant, and she filed it away somewhere she didn't examine too closely. By the time they stopped at a small bench near the palace wall, the sun had moved overhead and 2 hours had passed like 20 minutes. Eve stretched her legs out and tipped her face toward the warmth, and in the comfortable silence she thought, this is easy. This shouldn't be this easy. Can I ask you something? Siwen said. You can ask. I'll decide whether to answer. Why did you sit down? At the restaurant. You didn't have to. She considered the question honestly, which was the only way she knew how to consider things. Because you were hurting and you were alone and the room was full of people who weren't going to notice. And I noticed. A pause. I can't not notice. It's a problem sometimes. It didn't feel like a problem. She looked at him then. He was already looking at her. She held it for exactly as long as was comfortable and then returned her gaze to the middle distance with the serenity of a woman who had decided something without deciding it. My mum died 14 months ago, she said. He went very still. Cervical cancer. She was 51. She said it the way she had learned to say it, directly, without armor but without collapse. She was funny, impossibly funny, the kind of funny where strangers on buses became her friends. She used to say laughter was the second best medicine and the first one had terrible side effects. Siwen didn't say I'm sorry the way most people said it, reflexively, filling space. He sat with it for a moment. Then, what was her name? Eve blinked. Nobody ever asked that first. Claudette. She sounds like someone I would have liked. Everyone liked Claudette. Her voice stayed steady. I was here when she died. I couldn't get back in time, the flights, the timing, it all. She stopped, pressed her lips together. I made it for the funeral. But not for the last, not for the before. Eve. I'm fine, she said, and then caught herself and laughed softly. See, you're not the only one. You told me not to say that. I'm allowed. I make the rules. That's not how rules work. Sure it is. But she was smiling now, sideways and a little watery, and he was smiling back at her with something in his expression that she still couldn't name, and she decided she didn't need to name it yet. There was time. Probably. I'm working on it, she admitted, quieter. The grief. I started therapy in February. She searched for the word. Useful. Uncomfortable. Like physiotherapy for the soul. He tilted his head. My therapist says the same thing. He's been trying to get me to do this for 2 years. Do what? Talk. To people. About things that aren't strategy. She looked at him. And now. He looked back. I talk to you. The sentence sat between them in the warm afternoon air, simple and somehow enormous, and Eve let it sit without rushing past it because she was learning. Slowly, expensively, one therapy session at a time, to let moments be what they were instead of managing them into something more comfortable. You did, she said finally. And look, you survived. Barely. Barely counts. After that Saturday, they found a rhythm. It wasn't romantic, or rather, it wasn't named romantic, which is a different thing entirely. They texted daily. Not constantly, not with the anxious frequency of new attraction performing itself, but with the easy back and forth of two people who had simply decided that talking to each other was a reasonable thing to do each day. He sent her photographs sometimes. A building detail he found interesting. A menu at a restaurant he'd visited for work where the English translation had gone catastrophically wrong. She responded to those with the enthusiasm of a connoisseur. Saiwan, it says romantic beef sole. I need to know if you ordered it. I need to know. I did not. That is a failure of character and I'm disappointed in you. She sent him videos of Chef Miho's dramatic kitchen reactions, which she was definitely not supposed to be filming. She sent him a photo of the upstairs neighbor's new drill. He has escalated and so have I. I've printed and laminated the relevant lease clause and it is now taped to his door, which produced 3 separate laughing emojis from a man she had assessed, in their first meeting, as someone who had forgotten how to be silly. He remembered, or maybe he was relearning. She wasn't sure which, but she found she was fiercely invested in the outcome. They went out again. Not dates. Outings. This was the word Eve used internally with great discipline. They went to a contemporary art exhibition in Dongdaemun where Saiwan stood in front of a large abstract canvas for 4 full minutes before announcing that he thought he understood it. And Eve said, "Tell me." And he explained it with total sincerity while she listened and nodded and privately thought that his reading of it was more interesting than the artist's statement, which she had already memorized from the plaque. They went to the Han River on a Sunday and ate convenience store triangles and watched people cycle past and argued, with great warmth and zero resolution, about whether the triangles at GS25 were structurally superior to the ones at CU. She was pro-GS25. He was a CU loyalist. Neither of them convinced the other. Both of them found this enormously satisfying. He met her coworkers once, briefly, when he came to the restaurant on a weeknight and sat in her section in Gion, watching from across the floor with barely concealed calculation. Asked Eve afterward who he was. "A friend," Eve said, with the pleasant finality of someone closing a door. Gion opened her mouth. Eve said, "Don't." Without looking at her. The subject was closed. Miho, by contrast, had looked through the pass-through, clocked Saiwan across the restaurant, looked back at Eve and said, "Ava Sasai, that man is not looking at you like a friend. Mind the garnish, Miho. I'm just saying. The garnish, Miho." He minded the garnish. He was, however, correct, and Eve knew he was correct, which was the precise reason she was maintaining her system of labels. Friend. Outing. Not a date. Labels were structure. Structure was something she could manage. What was happening in the vicinity of her sternum when Saiwan smiled at her from across a room was something else entirely. And she was not yet prepared to manage it, so she was managing the labels instead. She was aware, textbook avoidance. Her therapist, Dr. Song, was going to have thoughts. The therapy sessions were every Thursday. Eve liked Dr. Song with the complex affection of someone who found a person both deeply comforting and mildly inconvenient, which is really the only way to like a therapist. She was 50-ish and soft-spoken and had a habit of asking questions that seemed simple and then sat in Eve's chest for the following week, slowly expanding. "Tell me about the friend," Dr. Song said in late April, having extracted the essential shape of Saiwan's existence from Eve's careful paraphrasing. "He's going through a lot. Family pressure, identity stuff, the emotional repression thing. I'm not asking about his circumstances. I'm asking about you. What does it feel like to be around him?" Eve considered lying. Not a real lie, just the comfortable social rounding off of fine, good, uncomplicated. She considered it and then didn't, because she was paying Dr. Song a serious amount of money to sit in this chair and be honest, and she intended to get her money's worth. "Safe," she said, which surprised her as it came out. Like, "I'm usually the one making everyone feel safe. And she paused. He doesn't need that from me. He doesn't come to me wanting to be managed. He just wants to be around me. And that feels different. Really different." Dr. Song made a small note. "And when did you last let someone make you feel safe, Eve?" The question sat in her chest. Started expanding. She thought about her mother. About being 14 and scared about a school thing and calling her mom, who had listened and then made her laugh and then said, "You know what you need? You need to remember who you are." She thought about how she had spent the years since her mother's diagnosis being the strong one, the capable one, the one holding everyone else's pieces, and how being that person had calcified into just being her. Eve who was fine. Eve who was sharp and warm and handled it. Eve who checked on everyone and didn't need checking on. "A while," she said honestly. Dr. Song nodded. Said nothing else about it. She didn't need to. It was a Friday night in May when the not a date became undeniable. They had gone to a rooftop bar in Yongsan. Siwen's suggestion, because he had heard about it from someone at work and wanted her opinion, which was increasingly his reason for most things. And the evening was warm and the city was glittering below them, and they were on their second drink when the music shifted to something slower and a couple near them started dancing, informal and easy, just swaying. Eve was watching the city. Siwen was watching Eve. She felt it before she turned, that particular quality of being looked at, the specific warmth of someone's attention landing on you and staying. She turned and found him watching her with an expression that was no longer unreadable. She had learned his face by now, its calibrations and weather systems, and what she was reading in it at this specific moment was something she had been carefully not reading for 6 weeks. "What?" she said, because she was Eve and she faced things. "Nothing," he said, which was Siwen for something. "I'm not ready to say yet." "Siwen, you're just—" He stopped, looked away, looked back. The city hummed below them. "You have this thing you do, where you look at something and you just completely give it your attention. Like you decided it matters and now it does." She was quiet. "You did it to me," he said. "In the restaurant. You looked at me like I mattered before you knew anything about me." "You did matter," she said simply. "You were a person having a hard time. That's sufficient." "Eve." His voice was different, lower. The way it got when he was saying something that cost something. "I think you know that this isn't." "Siwen. I think you know," he said again quietly, "that I'm not here as your friend. I'm trying to be. I know that's what you want. But I think you should know that He stopped himself, laughed once, short and rueful. "I told my therapist about you." She blinked. "What did he say?" "He said I should tell you." She looked at him. He looked back. Below them the city was lit up like every promise that had ever been kept, and Eve Campbell, who managed everything, who was strong for everyone, who had built herself a life out of competence and warmth and chosen belonging, felt something in her chest crack open, just slightly, along a seam she'd forgotten was there. "I told my therapist about you too," she said. "What did she say?" "She asked me when I last let someone make me feel safe." He was very still. And I said," Eve said softly, "a while." He reached across the small table between them, turned his hand over open and left it there, waiting, not asking, not taking, just there. The way she had put her hand over his on the tablecloth 6 weeks ago, in a restaurant, in the beginning of something neither of them had named yet. She looked at his hand. She looked at him. She put her hand in his. "Still not calling it a date," she said. He curled his fingers around hers, warm and certain. "Whatever you want to call it." The city glittered. The music played. And somewhere in the middle of a rooftop in Yongsan, Eve stopped managing the labels and let the thing be what it was. The first time Siwen said "I love you," he wasn't looking at her. He was standing at her kitchen window in his socks. Gray, one with a small hole at the toe that she had noticed and he didn't know she'd noticed, holding a mug of the ginger tea she made on Sunday mornings, watching the rain come down over Mapo in long silver sheets. She was behind him at the counter, slicing fruit, not looking at him either, and the apartment was full of the comfortable quiet that had become their specific language. Not silence born of nothing to say, but silence born of not needing to fill every moment, which is the rarer and more valuable kind. She didn't know what made him say it then. Maybe the rain. Maybe the tea. Maybe the fact that it was a Sunday in June and they had spent the previous afternoon at Han River and he had laughed so hard at something she said that he'd had to sit down on the grass, properly sit down, hand on chest, and she had stood over him making it worse with her expression alone. Maybe it was the accumulation of all the Sundays and Saturdays and Thursday texts and rooftop evenings and therapy sessions and phone calls and slow walks through the city that had been building toward this single moment at her kitchen window. "I love you," he said, to the rain, the knife stilled in her hand. She didn't move. "I know that's," he stopped. "I know we haven't." Another stop. She could hear him thinking, which she had learned to recognize, a particular quality of his silence that meant the interior work was happening in real time. "I wasn't going to say it yet. I had a plan." "You had a plan," she repeated. "There was a dinner involved. A specific restaurant. I had the table booked." She set the knife down. "Siwen, I know. You were going to plan the I love you." A pause. It seemed responsible. She turned around. He was still facing the window, mug cradled in both hands, shoulders carrying that particular tension of a man who had said an enormous thing, and was waiting to find out what the ground was going to do. She crossed the kitchen. She stood beside him at the window, shoulder to arm. He was taller. She had always found this funny, this geometry of them, and she looked at the rain for a moment and then she said, "I love you too. And I'm glad you said it to the window first because I need a minute." He turned then, and his face, God, his face. She had catalogued every expression in his vocabulary by now, and this one was new. It was the expression of someone receiving something they had not been sure they were allowed to want. It was the expression of the boy underneath the air, the person underneath the position, the man who had cried at table 9 14 minutes before close and changed the entire trajectory of both their lives. "A minute for what?" he asked. "To not cry in my own kitchen," she said. "Give me the minute, Siwen." He pressed his lips together. His eyes were doing something. "You're crying." I said, "Give me the minute." "You're literally." "Kong Siwen, I swear." He set his mug on the windowsill and pulled her into his arms, and she let him, face against his chest. And for a moment they just stayed there in the rain light of her kitchen while she took her minute, and he held her through it, and neither of them said anything because neither of them needed to. His hand moved up her back slowly. Her arms came around him. Outside the rain kept doing what rain does, patient, complete, indifferent to everything except falling. She tilted her head up. He looked down. She was close enough to read every detail of his face, and for once she had no desire to manage what she read there. Because what she read there was simply, "You. I choose you." "The restaurant you booked," she said. "Yes. Is it nice?" "Very." "Then we're still going," she said. "I want the dinner. I deserve the dinner. You don't get to do it at my kitchen window while I'm cutting fruit and keep the dinner." He smiled. The one from the bottom of him. The one she had reached for the first night and kept reaching for until it became easy, until it came quickly, until it was just his smile and she was its most common cause. "You can have everything," he said. "The dinner, the window, all of it." She looked at him for a long moment, warm and certain and home in a way that geography had never quite covered. And then she reached up and touched his jaw with one hand, light, deliberate, a choice, and said, "Good. Now let go of me. Your tea is getting cold and I need to finish the fruit." He laughed, let her go, retrieved his mug, and Eve turned back to the counter with the quiet, rooted joy of someone who had finally let the thing be what it was and found that what it was good. She met his family in July. She would have preferred more notice. She was given 4 days. This was, Siwen explained, how his family operated. Not in long negotiations but in sudden arrangements that were presented as casual and were categorically not. "My mother wants to have lunch," he told her. "On a Wednesday evening over the phone. Sunday. At the house." "By the house," Eve said. "You mean the one you've described as having 7 rooms on the main floor, yes." "Siwen. She's not. She's going to be." "Eve. What does she know about me?" A pause that was exactly long enough to be informative. "Everything," he said. "Define everything. Your name, your job, where you're from, Leeds, the rooftop, what I told my therapist, what Dr. Song said." Another pause. "She may have also seen the photo I have of you on my phone." "Siwen. She went through my phone. She's my mother. I can't." "Kong Siwen. Sunday at 1 o'clock, he said, with the energy of a man closing a door quickly. "I'll pick you up at noon. You'll be great. I love you." He hung up before she could respond, which was almost impressive. She spent Thursday being normal about it. Friday she called her cousin Petra in London, who had met a partner's family before, and said, wisely and unhelpfully, "Don't be scared. Just be yourself." Eve said, "Petra, if myself is a black woman from Jamaica via Leeds who works as a waitress showing up to a Korean mafia family's Sunday lunch. Being myself is either the best idea or the last thing I ever do." Petra laughed so hard she dropped her phone. Saturday she went to therapy. Dr. Song said, "What are you most afraid of?" "That they look at what I am and see what I'm not." Dr. Song nodded slowly. "And what are you?" Eve straightened slightly. "I'm Eve Campbell. I am 26 years old. I have a degree from Leeds and a Korean that would embarrass most people who underestimate me. I have a laugh that has turned an entire restaurant floor around on a bad night. I have survived grief that nearly unmade me and built myself back up, and I still, on the other side of all of it, manage to care about people the way most people can't sustain. I loved their son back to himself." She paused. "And I make extraordinary Sunday morning fruit." Dr. Song smiled. Go to the lunch, Eve. The Kong family home was in a quiet, wealthy pocket of Songbukdong where the streets were tree-lined and the houses were set back behind gates, and everything was very tasteful and very serious. Saiwen held her hand in the car and she let him, looking out the window with the composed serenity of someone whose internal state was categorically more complicated than her face suggested. My father doesn't say much, Saiwen told her, for the third time. But when he does say something, it's direct. I do direct, Eve said. My brother is easy. He'll like you immediately. Good. And my mother. He stopped. Your mother. She's a lot. Saiwen. I am also a lot. That is one of my established characteristics. He looked at her sideways, something warm moving across his face. She cried when I told her about you. Not sad crying. The other kind. Eve turned to look at him. Why? Because I called her after the first time I saw you, he said quietly. That night, after the restaurant, I told her I'd cried in front of a stranger and she'd stayed. And she said, he paused. She said, then she's not a stranger. Eve looked out the window. She took a breath. She rearranged her face. You're going to make me cry before I walk in there, and I will not forgive you. You're fine. I am not fine, You said that's allowed. Your rule. She laughed despite herself. I hate you a little bit. No, you don't. No, she agreed. I don't. Kong Young-hee, Saiwen's mother, was 60 years old and moved through her home with the specific authority of a woman who had never in her life walked into a room she didn't own. She was elegant in the architectural sense. Structured, considered, every detail intentional. She wore a silk blouse the color of deep teal. Her hair was silver-streaked and immaculate. And she had Saiwen's eyes, dark, observant, the kind that took inventory of a room in one pass. She came to the entrance hall when they arrived and she looked at Eve. Eve looked back. Then Kong Young-hee broke into the widest, most sudden smile Eve had ever seen on a person who had seemed, 2 seconds prior, potentially formidable, and said in rapid Korean, Oh, she's exactly right. Saiwen. She's exactly right. Look at her. Why are you just standing there? Bring her in. Ama. Come in. Come in. Are you hungry? Of course you're hungry. Saiwen said you work the morning shift. You must be. Oh, your earrings, those are wonderful. Where are they from? My mother gave them to me, Eve said, in Korean, and Young-hee stopped talking. Her face changed, tender and immediate, the way faces change when they recognize a word that carries weight. She had very good taste, Eve added, smiling. Young-hee reached out and took Eve's hand in both of hers. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman, the best I've known. Then she raised the second best. Young-hee said simply, and pulled her gently toward the dining room as though it were entirely settled, as though Eve had always been coming here, as though the universe had simply been working out the logistics. Eve glanced back at Saiwen over her shoulder. He was standing in his own family's entrance hall with the expression of a man watching something he had hoped for become real in real time. She raised her eyebrows at him. He raised his back. She mouthed, told you. He mouthed back, I know. Kong Si-hoon, the younger brother, was 24 and studying architecture, and had an energy that reminded Eve so strongly of herself at 22 that she liked him before he finished saying hello. He pulled out her chair, asked her opinion on 3 things in the first 5 minutes, and then, testing, grinning, attempted a joke in the most convoluted Korean slang that was clearly designed to see whether she'd follow it. She followed it, responded with something sharper. He turned to Saiwen with the expression of someone who had just been defeated in a sport he invented and said, I like her. She stays. She's not a stray cat. Si-hoon, Saiwen said. She is magnificent is what she is. Si-hoon said to Eve directly, because he was a man of integrity. I agree, Eve said, and clinked her water glass to his. The father, Kong Hyun-woo, silver-templed, precisely spoken, a man whose whole bearing communicated that he had spent decades in rooms where every word was a transaction, sat at the head of the table and ate and asked Eve 2 questions with the focused economy of someone who had decided those were the relevant ones. The first was what she had studied. The second was what she intended. She answered both directly and without softening the edges, because she had been right in the car. She did direct. He nodded at each answer, said nothing further. When the lunch ended and they were in the hallway, he stopped beside her briefly and said, quietly enough that only she heard. My son laughs more now. Eve looked at him. He has a lot to laugh about. The corner of Kong Hein was mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but the architecture of one. He walked back toward his study. Eve filed it under sufficient. More than, actually. But it was young he who made the afternoon. She was the kind of woman who asked real questions and listened to the real answers, who refilled Eve's glass before she had to ask, who laughed loudly and without apology, who told stories about Saiwen's childhood with the gleeful precision of a woman who had been waiting years for the right audience. The one about 8-year-old Saiwen composing a formal written apology to his kindergarten teacher. 2 paragraphs, young, he said. 2 whole paragraphs, he was 5, 6, fine, 8, but still. Had Eve laughing so hard she pressed her hand over her mouth and Saiwen buried his face in his hands and Sihun applauded and Young. He beamed like she had just won something. And then Young, he looked at Eve across the table. At ease now, warm, one hand gesturing mid-story, and said, with the directness her son had clearly inherited. You make him soft. This is not a criticism. This family has enough hard. What we needed was someone who knew how to reach the soft part. The table was quiet for a moment. Saiwen looked at the table. Sihun looked at his hands. Eve held Young-hee's gaze and said, he makes me feel safe. This family has enough strength. What I needed was somewhere it was all right to put some of it down. Young-hee nodded once. Then you're both useful to each other. We prefer the word loved, Eve said. But yes. Young-hee laughed. Enormous. Delighted. Full-bodied. Saiwen, she said without taking her eyes off Eve. If you do not hold on to this woman with everything you have, I will personally be furious with you. I'm aware, Amma. Good. She raised her glass. To Eve, who stayed. To Eve. Sihun echoed immediately. Glass up. A beat. Then Kang Hyun-woo, from the far end of the table, raised his glass without looking up from his plate. Eve raised hers. To all of you, she said, for letting me. They drove home in the early evening, the city shifting into its golden hour, and Eve sat in the passenger seat with her shoes off and her feet tucked under her and her head tipped back against the rest. And the feeling in her chest was something she had not felt in a very long time and had been half convinced, on the darker Thursdays, she might not feel again. She felt like she was somewhere. Not just geographically. Somewhere. Like she had been moving through life in transit. Good transit, interesting transit, transit she had chosen and loved. But transit nonetheless, and now something had shifted and she was no longer between places but inside one. Your mother is incredible, she said, to the ceiling of the car. She loves you already. I know. I love her. My brother texted me before we left the driveway. What did he say? He said, and I quote, she's a 10. Don't mess this up. I'll be devastated if she leaves. Not you. Eve smiled to the ceiling. Smart kid. I'm going to tell him you said that. Please do. Saiwen reached across the console without looking away from the road and took her hand. She turned her palm up to meet his. Outside, Seoul moved past in layers. The lit-up shopfronts, the leafy residential streets, the river catching the last of the light. Eve, he said. I want to ask you something. You can ask. I'll decide whether to answer. I know. A breath. Move in with me. She was quiet for a moment. The city moved. His thumb traced slow across her knuckles. My plants, she said. They come. The print above my bed. It comes. Miho lives 2 streets from my apartment. I need proximity to Miho. We can visit Miho, the upstairs neighbor. Eve. She turned her head to look at him. He was watching the road, jaw set, waiting. Not the jaw of someone braced for grief this time, but someone braced for an answer which was a completely different architecture, and she loved the difference so specifically that it sat in her throat. I need to think about it, she said. Okay. I'll have an answer by Tuesday. Okay. The answer is yes, but I need to think about it first. He exhaled. His hand tightened around hers. Okay. Stop smiling. I'm not smiling. You're absolutely smiling. She was. The evening held them easy and full all the way home. She gave him her answer on Tuesday as promised. She showed up at his apartment with 2 bags and the framed print from above her bed and a potted plant she had named Gerald. He opened the door and looked at all of it and then looked at her. The rest comes Saturday, she said. He stepped back to let her in. She crossed the threshold. He closed the door behind her. He took the plant, Gerald, she said. He nodded seriously as though he understood that Gerald was not negotiable, and set him on the windowsill where the light was good, and then he turned back to her in the entryway of what was now also her home, and the look on his face was the last new expression she learned. Not the smile, not the relief, not the careful gathering of composure. This one was rest. The face of someone who has arrived somewhere and known it. She walked to him. His arms came around her, warm and unhurried. The hold of someone who had nowhere else to be. Her face found the place on his chest she had memorized. His chin came to rest on her head. Outside, Soul did what Soul did, layered and luminous and indifferent and magnificent. Gerald sat on the windowsill in the good light. The print leaned against the wall, waiting for its nail. You are not too much. You are exactly enough. And in the quiet of an evening that didn't need to be anything other than what it was, Eve and Cywin simply held each other, breathing in the same rhythm, warm and certain in the space they had built by choosing each other. Slowly and then all at once, from a restaurant table at 9:47 p.m. when the world had been full of people and only one of them had stayed, she tilted her face up. He looked down. This was the choreography of them, these small adjustments, these mutual tunings. Hi, she said softly. Hi, he said back. She kissed him first. She would have, even if he hadn't been about to. That was who she was. She moved toward what she wanted with her whole self, no half measures, no lingering on the threshold. She kissed him the way she did everything, with complete attention, with warmth that was not performance but nature, with the particular quality of a person who has decided something and is finished deciding. He kissed her back with everything he had. Every week of learning her. Every morning text and Thursday session and coffee at the tiny window stall and river afternoon and rooftop evening and her hand on his at the tablecloth and his hand open and waiting and her choosing to reach for it. Every Sunday in her kitchen with ginger tea and rain. Every time she had looked at him like he mattered before she had reason to. It was unhurried. It was complete. It was two people who had healed enough to be here. Not perfectly healed, not finished, but enough. Enough to stand in an entryway with a plant named Gerald and a framed note in a mother's handwriting and choose this, openly and without armor, together. He walked her back slowly until she was against the wall and she laughed against his mouth. That laugh, the one that had turned restaurant floors around, the one that made Miho knock a ladle against a pot, and he smiled into the kiss, which was something she would put in her list of favorite things, him smiling into kissing me. The bags, she said, between them. Later, he said. Gerald needs. Gerald is fine, he said. And she looked at the windowsill where Gerald sat in his excellent light, unbothered, and she decided he was right. Gerald was fine, and the bags could wait, and Tuesday was the best day she had chosen in a long time. She took Cywin's face in her hands, this face she had read like a language, that she had watched learn how to rest. And she looked at him for one long moment, clear-eyed and present and entirely here. You know what your problem was? She said softly. When I met you? What? You forgot that you were allowed to be held. His eyes were doing something. She let them. I remember now, he said. I know, she said. I taught you. He pulled her close again, tender and sure, and the city lit up outside the window and Gerald grew in the good light and the print leaned against the wall with its truth, and Eve Campbell, who had crossed an ocean on a dare to herself and built a life from warmth and wit and sheer refusal to be diminished, was home. Not the building. Not the postcode. Him. This. Them. Home.
Hello besties, in this story we learned that the strongest thing you'll ever do is let someone see you breaking. Siwon had everything, money, power, family name, and was dying inside because he wouldn't let anyone. Eve had survived everything, grief, betrayal, being far from home, by being strong for everyone else until she forgot to let anyone be strong for her. They didn't save each other by being perfect, they saved each other by being honest, present, and willing to stay. Thank you so much for watching. Kindly like, subscribe, and share.